After Gerald passed, I gave myself one rule: don't become a burden. I'd watched my own mother spend her final years shrinking herself into corners of other people's homes, apologizing for taking up space, and I swore I would never do that. So when my daughter called me in the spring and said, "Mom, we need you," I made sure to hear the word need very carefully before I said yes. She wasn't wrong. My son-in-law had just taken a pay cut to switch careers. My daughter was working double shifts at the hospital. The twins, boy and girl, 7 years old and chaos in sneakers, were being shuttled between a rotating cast of babysitters who never remembered which one was allergic to tree nuts. My daughter sounded like she was holding the phone with her teeth because her hands were too full of everything else. I packed 2 suitcases and drove 4 hours north. That was 2 years and 8 months ago. At first, the arrangement had the warm, provisional feeling of a good idea. I cooked dinners from scratch. I handled school pickups. I learned which twin wanted their sandwich cut in triangles and which one would cry if you cut it at all. I paid the electric bill twice when things got tight, then the water bill, then quietly covered 3 months of the twins' after-school program when my daughter said she didn't know how they'd manage. I didn't keep a ledger. That felt mercenary. I told myself this was what family did, that money moved where it was needed, and that I was simply in a position to help. I converted the sunroom into my bedroom. It wasn't ideal. The heat didn't reach it well in January, but I put a space heater near the bed and called it cozy. My daughter thanked me profusely for the first few months. Then the thank yous became briefer, and then they moved to a different room entirely. And then one day I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked how I was sleeping. I kept the house moving. That was the only way I knew how to describe it. Not cleaning it or managing it or running it, but moving it. The way a heart keeps blood going without anyone noticing until it stops. I moved the laundry. I moved the groceries from the car to the shelves. I moved the twins from school to home to piano lessons and back. I moved the tension out of rooms by leaving them before arguments could reach me. I became very good at being invisible in a house I was holding together. My son-in-law was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He was distracted, the way people are when they are trying to reinvent themselves professionally and don't have bandwidth left over for courtesy. He remembered to say hello most evenings. He occasionally asked if I needed anything from the hardware store. He was simply someone who had not considered, when my daughter suggested I move in, that I would actually be present every day, in his kitchen, on his couch, in the peripheral vision of his life. I could see it sometimes, the slight recalibration in his expression when he came downstairs, and I was already there. I ignored it. I am good at ignoring things I can't change. It was a Wednesday when my daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She had a look on her face I recognized from when she was 16 and had broken something she didn't know how to tell me about. "My mother-in-law's hip surgery didn't go well," she said. "The recovery is going to be longer than expected." I told her I was sorry to hear that. I meant it. She and my father-in-law are going to need to stay somewhere for a while. Maybe several months, maybe longer. I nodded slowly. "Where are they thinking?" She looked down at the mug. "Here would make the most sense. They can't manage stairs and we have the bedroom on the main floor." I thought about the bedroom on the main floor, the one with the attached bathroom and the good morning light. My sunroom had a cracked window latch I'd been asking to have fixed since October. I said, "That makes sense. Where would I be?" She was quiet for a moment, that lasted longer than it should have. "We were thinking the sunroom could work for one of them for a little while. Her mother's recovery is intense. She'll need the main bedroom. My father-in-law could use the sunroom. And we could maybe look into some options for you." Option. I held the word in my mouth, like something with a strange taste. She said it the way people say options when they mean they haven't figured out how to say the actual thing yet. "What kind of options?" I asked. She finally looked up. "There's a short-term rental a few towns over. It would just be temporary, until we get everyone settled." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had driven through a snowstorm to reach when she was in labor. This woman whose homework I had checked, and whose heart I had held through a divorce before this marriage, and whose children I was currently raising at a rate that would have bankrupted a professional nanny. and I saw that she had already made the decision and was only now delivering it to me as a conversation. I smiled. I didn't mean to. It just came out of me, the way a laugh escapes at a funeral when the grief gets too big for any reasonable container. "Okay," I said. She looked almost relieved. She reached across and touched my hand. "It would only be a few months, Mom. You understand." "I do," I said. "I understand completely." That night I sat in the sunroom wrapped in 2 blankets, because the space heater had started making a burning smell, and I didn't want to leave it on overnight. I thought about Gerald, who used to say I had a talent for absorbing punishment and calling it patience. I thought about the twins asleep down the hall, the boy who still called for me when he had bad dreams, the girl who had learned to braid her own hair because I showed her how. I thought about the electric bills and the water bills and the check I had written 3 months ago to cover the cost of my son-in-law's licensing exam because my daughter said they were stretched too thin and he needed this. I had not asked to be paid back. It had not occurred to me to ask. It occurred to me now. I got up and found my laptop. I am not particularly sentimental about money, but I am organized, the way women of my generation learned to be organized when we understood early that no one else would keep track of things for us. I had saved every receipt. Old habit. I opened my email and began going back month by month. The grocery runs were the first thing. I had started doing the household shopping not long after moving in, partly because I was the one who knew what the twins would eat, and partly because my daughter worked early shifts and there was no one else. I looked at my bank statements. I had been depositing money into a shared household account my daughter had set up for just this kind of thing. I pulled those records too. I opened a document and started a column. By 2 in the morning I had a number. I won't say what it was. I'll say it was large enough that when I looked at it on the screen, something that had been pulling tight in my chest for months finally named itself. I closed the laptop. I did not sleep much. The following week, I called my oldest friend, Ruth. She lives 40 minutes away and has a station wagon and an opinion about everything, which is exactly what I needed. I told her I wanted to have coffee and talk through something. She said she'd be there in an hour and arrived in 45 minutes. We sat in a diner 2 towns over because I didn't want to have the conversation in the house. Ruth listened, the way she always has, without interrupting, without performing sympathy, just listening with her whole face. When I finished, she said, "You already know what you're going to do." "I do?" "You called me," she said. "You didn't call to be talked out of anything." She was right. I had known since I sat in the sunroom with 2 blankets and did the arithmetic. I had known when I said okay to my daughter and watched her look relieved. I had known the moment she said options, as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than a person who had held her family together for nearly 3 years. The next 2 weeks I spent quietly and deliberately. I started looking at apartments in the area, real apartments, not short-term rentals, not options. I had savings. My daughter didn't know the full extent of money. Gerald and I had put aside in an account I'd kept separate since before we were married, out of a habit I'd never been able to explain and now no longer needed to. I found a place 20 minutes away. First floor, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with good light, and a window above the sink that faced east. I applied and was approved within 4 days. The weekend, my daughter and son-in-law took the twins to her in-laws' house to help get it ready for the post-surgery transition. I called Ruth. She arrived with her station wagon and her sleeves rolled up. We moved quietly, the way I had learned to move through that house efficiently, without drama. I took what was mine. I had kept careful notes, so this wasn't difficult. The stand mixer I'd brought from my own kitchen when I first moved in, the good pots, the cutting board Gerald had made by hand from a walnut tree in our backyard, which I had brought because I couldn't part with it, and which my daughter had used every single day without once asking where it came from. The extra shelving unit in the twins' room that I had assembled myself on a Saturday morning while everyone else slept in. The throw blankets folded on the couch, both of them purchased by me. The small bookshelf in the front hall that had arrived in my second carload and stayed because there was nowhere else to put it. I left the furniture that was theirs. I left the children's drawings on the refrigerator. I left the spice rack my son-in-law had installed, though most of the spices in it were ones I had bought and alphabetized. I decided that was a gift. I left a single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. I had written it the night before in my best handwriting because I think presentation matters. It said, I paid for what I took. I gave away what I could. I wish you well. Please do not call me until you have thought carefully about what you want to say. Ruth read it over my shoulder and said, "That last line is doing a lot of work." "I know," I said. We drove to the new apartment and unloaded everything in 3 hours. Ruth unpacked the kitchen while I assembled the bed frame, and then we sat on the floor eating sandwiches from a bag she had thought to bring and did not talk about my daughter at all. We talked about Ruth's garden and a book she was reading and whether either of us could still manage a long road trip, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation, my shoulders came down from where they'd been living for the better part of 3 years. The apartment was quiet that night, genuinely quiet, not the pressed-down quiet of a house where you are trying not to take up space, but the open quiet of a place that belongs to you. I made tea. I stood at my east-facing kitchen window and watched the streetlights come on one by one. The thermostat was set to 68, and I walked over and moved it to 71 without asking anyone. The first call came the next morning at 7:42. I looked at my daughter's name on the screen and let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was careful, measured, the tone she uses when she's trying not to escalate. "Mom, we just got home. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you call me?" The second call came an hour later, third and fourth before noon. My son-in-law called once at 1 in the afternoon. He left no voicemail, which told me my daughter had asked him to try because she thought it might land differently. It didn't. By 3 o'clock, the messages had changed. Her voice had lost its careful management. "Where is the stand mixer, Mom? We can't find the good pots. Did you take the pot rack? Was that even yours? The twins keep asking where the walnut cutting board is because they want to make cookies and I don't know what to tell them." I sat with my phone in my lap and drank my tea and thought about what to tell them. I had told them everything they needed to know. It was on the counter in the kitchen, in my best handwriting. The call that mattered came on the third day. It was late evening, and my daughter had stopped trying to modulate her voice. She sounded the way she'd sounded when she was small, and had lost something important. "Mom, I need you to talk to me. I've been thinking about what you left on the counter, and I didn't understand it at first. And now, I think I do. And can you just tell me if you're okay?" I answered that one. "I'm more than okay," I told her. "I'm in my own kitchen. I can see the street from my window. I'm having tea." Silence. "You're not coming back." It wasn't a question, quite. It had the shape of one, but the weight of something she had already understood, and was only now letting land. "Not to sleep there, no." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't think of it the way you did. I didn't think about what you were giving up." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's not an excuse. I know that too." She asked if she could come see the apartment. I said yes, but not yet. I needed to learn what the light looked like at different times of day first. I needed to know what it felt like to wake up there several mornings in a row before I had anyone else's energy in the rooms. She said she understood. I believed her. A week after I moved in, the woman next door knocked on my door. Her name was Sylvia, 73 years old, recently moved from the East Coast to be closer to her son, who she described with the particular affection of a mother who has accepted her child exactly as he is. She brought a plant. She said the building had a walking group on Tuesday mornings if I was interested. Nothing ambitious, just 2 miles along the river path and coffee after. I went the following Tuesday. There were 6 of us. 2 women who'd been walking together for 4 years. A man who had recently retired from teaching and was still figuring out what to do with the mornings, and 2 others who, like me, were in some version of starting over. We walked and talked about nothing in particular, the geese that had taken over the far end of the path, a good podcast someone had found, whether the new bakery near the bridge was worth the line. No one asked me to do anything. No one needed me to produce anything. I was simply there, a person among people, moving through the morning air. I walked back to my apartment and stood in the kitchen, and made eggs the way I like them, which is a way no one else in my family has ever liked, and I ate them at my own table, in the good quiet of a Tuesday that belonged entirely to me. My daughter came to visit on a Saturday, 3 weeks after I moved. She brought the twins, which I hadn't expected, and for a moment when I opened the door and saw all 3 of them standing in the hall, I had to look away briefly and find something to do with my hands. The twins moved through the apartment the way children do, touching everything and asking questions. The girl found the walnut cutting board in the kitchen and said, "You brought it." The boy found Gerald's old field guide to birds on the bookshelf and asked if he could look at it. I said yes to both without hesitating. My daughter and I sat at the kitchen table with coffee. She had clearly rehearsed something, and I let her say it without interrupting. She talked about the pressure of that period, the fear about her in-laws, the way she had made a decision without thinking it through, the way she should have come to me first and talked it through together. She said she had been treating me like a fixture in her life rather than a person in mine. She said that more than once, in different ways, like she was trying to make sure it landed fully. When she finished, I said, "I know all of that. I also know you meant it when you called and asked me to come." That part was real. The part that wasn't real was the idea that what I was giving was free because it came from love. She nodded. She looked like she was going to say something and then didn't. "I'm not interested in keeping score," I told her. "But I needed you to understand the weight of what you were holding and handing back." She reached across the table and took my hand. I let her. We talked for 2 hours. Real talking, the kind we hadn't done since before I moved in, maybe since before she was married. By the time she was packing the twins' things into their backpacks, the apartment felt like a place that had earned something, some quality of realness that can't be arranged in advance, only arrived at. At the door, the boy hugged me around the middle, the way he always does, hard and sudden, like he's trying to leave a mark. The girl took my hand and said, "Can we come back next week?" "Yes," I said. "Tuesday evenings work well for me." She nodded very seriously, as though we had just concluded a business arrangement. Maybe we had. I closed the door and stood for a moment in the front hallway. I could hear them in the stairwell, the twins' voices ricocheting off the walls, my daughter's voice threading through, patient and present. I stood and listened until the building door shut below, and then the sound of the car starting and pulling away. Then there was my apartment, exactly as I had left it, exactly as I had arranged it. The plant from Sylvia on the windowsill, the bird book back on its shelf, the walnut cutting board leaning against the backsplash where I could see the grain of the wood Gerald had chosen so carefully on an October afternoon 20 years ago, the thermostat at 71. The door locked with a key that was mine and mine alone. I am 63 years old. I have learned, later than I should have, that the people who love us are not always capable of valuing us, and that those two things have very little to do with each other. I have learned that leaving a place is not the same as losing it. I have learned that the rooms you build for yourself, with your own savings, your own 2 hands, your own long and particular knowledge of what you need, are the rooms you finally rest in. Gerald used to say I had a talent for absorbing punishment and calling it patience. He was right that I was absorbing it. He was wrong about what to call it. I think what I was doing, all those years and all those months in that sunroom with the cracked latch, was waiting. Not for rescue, not for recognition. Just waiting to remember that there was another option, that I had the ability to use it, and that the life waiting on the other side of using it might feel, astonishingly, like this. Like tea in my own mug. Like 68 degrees becoming 71 with one quiet adjustment of my hand. Like a Tuesday morning on a river path, with people who are glad I'm there. Like my grandson's arms around my middle like he's trying to leave a mark. Like peace, finally. Not the peace of someone who has given up. The peace of someone who has arrived.